This week we continue our Sutta exploration series with a return to the middle-length discourses. And you've probably heard me say many times how the middle-length discourses, I often think of it as a misnomer because in many cases they are not middle length compared to the long discourses. Some of them can be quite long. Especially when it is Mahā sections, as in the greater discourses, as the case is today with today's sutta, which will be the 38th Majjhima Nikaya Sutta discourse. Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya Sutta, a giant in many ways. The greater discourse on the destruction of craving. This is one of those discourses that it requires a special approach because it is indeed a complex sutta. It is in many circles, it is also a famous sutta because of the themes that it tackles. As the case was with the recent Majjhima Nikaya Sutta we've delved into a few weeks ago, Alagadupama Sutta, the simile of the venomous water snake, which again was another misnomer because you also have the simile of the water raft that the Buddha uses for the Dhamma, for being not something that we hold on to, attach ourselves to, and claim to be our own or our thing, because that would be literally missing the boat, missing the target. By the same token, not to be looking at the Dhamma without true understanding and maintaining a wrong path, meaning wrong views to be perpetuated under the guise of practicing the Dhamma, or let alone, even worse, even worse, in the case of teaching the Dhamma without understanding it. That's when it becomes, the simile comes to use, where the Buddha uses the example of the water snake. He says it would be like holding on to the tail of the snake, trying to grab the water snake, which is the most venomous, hoping to tame it, hoping to somehow get hold of it, but doing it the wrong way by holding on to the tail end of it or the body and not the head. And that is what's happening in many cases. And today's sutta actually starts with, you can think of it as the continuation of where Alagadupama left off. That's another way of approaching today's sutta. Because we have another monk, another bhikkhu. Last time it was Arita, who was claiming that, oh, even though the Buddha talks about sensual pleasure, sexuality, all these things to be contrary to the Dhamma, flat out wrong path, having nothing to do with the Dhamma, even though the Buddha says that, he says, but in reality, they are not. So basically, you can go engaging in sexuality and sensuality as a monk and still be able to attain and still be able to call yourself somebody who's practicing the Dhamma. And we saw what the Buddha did once he found out that that's really what Arita believed, and even worse, he was teaching that. So this was a person who was coming from the Upanishadic or Brahmanic traditions, even though he had been ordained as a bhikkhu, and we don't know how long he had been. But it's no surprise where you have individuals who were, with so many vasas, nevertheless had nothing to do with the Dhamma as far as understanding went. They just followed the observable sila portion of things, doing the right things the way they're supposed to be done. Meanwhile, when it came to the Dhamma, they were clueless. In fact, even worse, they were preaching something that was completely false, that had nothing to do with the Buddha's teachings. So today we find another bhikkhu. His name is Sāti, and the Buddha always added the rest of his name, son of a fisherman, who, Sāti that is, was going about and continuing his own Upanishadic tradition of understanding and view of what is a human being, what is a being, what happens when a person dies, a question that occurs for many of us. And it's a tender spot for many people, and many people walk around with that big question mark over their head as to what is it that's moving from life to life. Is it you know, isn't it a soul? Isn't it a person? Isn't it a self? Isn't it? And you even had developments of Buddhist traditions that followed that under the new terms, new things, new categorizations, new explanations, to make it more plausible, to make it more understandable for the common person who is not a practitioner, who can also be included within the Bhikkhu Sangha. That's how you had the idea of a bhavanga, for example, come up, something like an unconscious or subconscious in some of the later traditions, starting with the Abhidhamma, 300 years after the Buddha's death. Something that he didn't teach. It wasn't part of the baskets of teachings, the two being Sutta Pitaka and Vinaya Pitaka. So 3 centuries later, you have, actually more than 3 centuries later. So the first council happened 3 months after the Buddha died. The second council happened 100 years after the Buddha died. And then about 300 years after that, at the time of Emperor Ashoka, you had the third council. That's when we have the introduction of the Abhidhamma Pitaka. And it just got locked in and accepted as the canon. It became the Abhidhamma Pitaka, the basket of Abhidhamma, which is more of the psychological, all those metaphysical, all those other elements that were brought in, because people wanted to engage in trying to figure out. And unfortunately, in many cases, they were trying to figure out things outside of the suttas, outside of the discourses. So this is when it becomes really complex, and many people lose their path when confronted with certain teachings, like, 52 of this, 121 of that, all these different things, mind moments, thought moments, this, that. It can be really, really tedious, to say the least, but unnecessarily complex. But people wanted to have compartmentalized things, and also to perpetuate the idea, the feeling that we have, the comforting feeling that we have, that I am not going to die and completely, be wiped out, basically. Where does the fire go? Where does the light go? Where does the candle light go when it's blown out? We don't like to think about that. It's beyond our accepted notions of reality, because it leaves a big, again, the question mark. And we love to give answers, concrete answers, mind you. So here we have Sāti, who has been promulgating an idea that comes from the Upanishads, which he most certainly was carrying still, even in the Bhikkhu robes, wrong interpretation of the Dhamma. And he was teaching the Dhamma as, there is a person, there is that unbroken linkage. The person is simply moving bodies from life to life to life to life. And that is not what the Dhamma teaches. Now, for that, the Buddha is going to present several different, once it has been established, once the Buddha starts chastising, rebuking the wrong perceptions, conclusions, and wrong views of Sāti, that bhikkhu who was the son of a fisherman in the past. In addition, the Buddha has to give us an explanation as to why, and he's going to be interrogating the bhikkhus to make sure that, are there other Sātis in the crowd of Sangha? Remember, these were people, think of it this way. We imagine that once a person became a bhikkhu, or becomes a bhikkhu nowadays, that automatically they're cleansed, they're purified of their wrong views. This is a misconception. It's very misconstrued. It's a wrong way of looking at things, because we have to first look at what the person is saying. What are they teaching? How are they living? What is their behavior? But we like to go with appearances. Like I was saying, if a person is doing these things that are societally accepted norms for, let's say in this case, a bhikkhu, then he should be good. If she's a nun, then she's doing all those things, okay, then she must be solid. That's not enough, the Buddha says. You have to listen to what are they saying and how is it equating with their behavior, with what they say, with, with their attitude, their lifestyle, their livelihood, all these things. So unfortunately, unless they open their mouth, you're not going to know what they think, how they think, what are their views about things, what is, in the sense, understanding of the Dhamma. Is it accurate? You'd be surprised to know that many a time it is not accurate. It's shocking, but we're not allowed to speak like this because we're always watching each other's back type of a thing. I've seen this in Asia a lot, not just in Asia. You've also seen it in Los Angeles and other places. So again, this is not to create antagonism in any way, shape, or form between the laity and monastics. Far from it. That's not the intention here. But we hold the responsibility to know who is saying what and how accurate is it, how representative is it to the Buddha word. This is crucial. We cannot go hiding behind a bhikkhu's robes or a culture's, community's robes while we are refusing to challenge that respectfully when we see it really authentically being contrary to the Dhamma. That's what I mean, like legitimately they can be argued against because they don't represent the Buddha word. So we see this a lot. I used to see this a lot as a layman. And in certain situations, I had to raise my hand. One time I was just attending a temple activity, and there was a special event, and the bhikkhus were sitting there. I was not a bhikkhu then. Of course, I was just a layman, but I was nevertheless a lay Dhamma teacher. But I wasn't teaching that day. I was respectfully at a respectful distance from the Bhikkhu Sangha as it's supposed to be. But then a layperson asked a question and the Bhikkhu was unable to answer, given the hotness of the topic, because it was looking down upon the Dhamma as some type of an escapist, as some kind of a not respecting a material life or the responsibilities that a layman has to go through, and all these things where the Dhamma was not being truly given the space and the right to shine its truth. I couldn't hold myself from raising my hand when the bhikkhu could not answer. And there were other bhikkhus. And it wasn't my place to say a word, but I had to take, get the permission from the Sangha, from the Bhikkhu Sangha to speak. And I asked the Bhikkhu who was giving the talk, and I said, Bhante, can I please respond to that? After waiting for the Bhikkhu Sangha to respond, and they didn't for some reason. Maybe it was the language difficulty, perhaps. And then I was given that immediately, and I spoke to that question. We have to be courageous to stand up for what is truth. And we're going to see a group of monks who see Sāti proclaiming something that is completely deplorably wrong, goes against Paticcasamuppada, goes against the Dhamma entirely. And they confront him. Today we don't have that. People confront each other when their egos are being stepped upon. That's when people get very, sensitive and respond, in fact, react. But I don't see enough people standing up when they see something wrong being done against the teachings of the Buddha, against the Dhamma. So the Dhamma is the first thing that goes. So you can also look at the premise of this series that today happens to be, I think, 191st session of just this series of Sutta explorations we've been doing. And we're trying to change that, where the Dhamma becomes the primacy, at the primacy of our position. It has to be defended. It has to be protected as it's being promulgated, as it's being taught. Because today you have many, 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 many aritas and satis in the world. But the public is not standing up and saying, excuse me, you have the right to stand up and say, excuse me, if you know for sure that there's something wrong here, at least to question, to gain a better understanding yourself. Because as you are trying to muster up the courage to raise your hand to question, because it takes a lot of courage to do that, let's be honest. But others also are having the same issues. You'd be surprised to know how many. So would today's Sangha, would today's practitioners really be confronting modern day Satis, sons of fishermen, daughters of fishermen? I don't know. I honestly do not know. However, these series of suttas and any other platform that offers you authentic words of the Buddha and explorations of it, truthfully, honestly, with the right intentions, then that is already giving the public enough tools and enough foundation for you to go ahead and say, hold on, it says in this sutta that this is wrong, or yes, just like it says in this sutta, I see what you're saying here. And not to add more material for you to feel proud about, meaning a source for conceit to develop. No, that's not why we study the Dhamma. That's not why we learn terms, understand the connections of the teachings, the principles. That's not why we do it. We get it to understand, because ultimately the Dhamma is all about you living your life to the fullest. So you make sure that you cut the cord of more becomings, more rebirths. Not look forward for more, because that would be a total different tradition entirely, not the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. The freedom, the liberation that the Buddha experienced as a Buddha, that is why he taught us. No other reason. No other reason. Not to gain more merits, not to end up being rich, beautiful, powerful, influential in the next birth, in some heavenly realm or human realm. None of those things. Those were never the objective of the Dhamma, to be taught. And it has been carried over through centuries, 26 centuries, all this time. for that same purpose. And that's the attitude with which we need to study and practice the Dhamma. Not to be part of a community necessarily, although that can be part of that, but not the objective. Because the community will never save you. Never. When it comes to suffering, the community will never stop you from falling into the lower realms. Never. It's just a delusion. Your beliefs will never stop you from falling into the lower realms. Understanding will. But it requires you to deepen it, to develop that understanding so that you can understand what consciousness is, vijnana, which in this case we will see Sāti having the wrong understanding. And this is very crucial because we think in modern day society that views are not harmful. You know, the Brahmajala Sutta was all about that. The 62 wrong views, the Buddha says. If you want to know where a person ends up in their next birth, check their views, including your own. If you do not have that psychic ability, the second higher knowledge, as it's called in the suttas, to see where beings are reborn and where they come from into this life, into this birth. If you do not have that ability, don't fret, because you could still look at the person's position on things, their narratives, their opinions, how strongly, how staunchly are they attached to their views and what those views are. Check those, and you will see where they're going to end up. That's how powerful wrong views are. And that's how powerful right view is. So, without further ado, let's begin. So today we go, as I said, back to the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, Sutta number MN 38. 38. And remember, it's Majjhima Nikaya has a total of 152 suttas. So this is Sutta number 38. And it is the from the Mahāyamaka, the greater section on the paired discourses. And there's like paired as in Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya, there's the Chula, just like Mahā Tipadopama, Chula Hatipadopama, etc. Mahā Vedalla, Chula Vedalla. So this one is the greater discourse on the destruction of craving. Let's begin. So I divided it. I don't know if we've posted it online yet, but because it's a long sutta, we just I'm proofreading it, and Aya also is helping me doing that. So, and then once it's proofread, the whole thing, it's going to be posted on the website mindrelease.com. Anyhow, so the first section is Sāti, the fisherman's son, with his evil and convoluted view. That's the heading. I have personally heard this. At one time, the Blessed One was living at Savathi's Anathapindika's monastery in Jeta's Park. A convoluted and evil view had sprouted in a certain bhikkhu called Sāti, who, being the son of a fisherman, had formerly engaged in the catching and selling of fish. Being led by his wickedly pernicious view, Sāti, the son of a fisherman, had concluded, the way I have come to see and understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, there is an unchanging essence, which is the very same consciousness that keeps wandering and cycling through the rounds of rebirth. It cannot be otherwise. You can call it a soul, just a matter of semantics, but the essence is the same. They're both deluded to believe that there is a soul that carries over, a substantial self, a thingness, and what Sāti was saying about consciousness. On learning about this, many bhikkhus decided to intervene as they went to the bhikkhu Sāti, the son of a fisherman, and began questioning him. Friend Sāti, could it be true that you have been promoting such a wrong and convolutedly evil view by declaring, the way I have come to see and understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, there is an unchanging essence, which is the very same consciousness that keeps wandering and cycling through the rounds of rebirth. It cannot be otherwise. And he responds by saying, that is a true statement, friends. For that is exactly the way I have seen and understood the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One. Then, on witnessing this, well, first I have to say something here. When a person says the Blessed One, so he's saying, he is declaring that the Buddha is his teacher. But the dangerous part is this. That is how I see and understand the teaching of the Blessed One. Simply because a person is following a certain teacher does not automatically mean that they understand or are subscribing to what the teacher is saying. They're not seeing what the teacher is giving to them, sharing with them, teaching them, instructing them. This is dangerous. This is a silent assassin, a thief. In the commentaries, he's called, like in this case, Sāti is called a thief. Because what does a thief do? What does an assassin do? They pretend to be somebody they are not. They've convinced themselves, in the case of Sāti at least, that he's a genuine student of the Buddha. He's sharing the information, he's sharing the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. Meanwhile, every time he opens his mouth, other things, other disciplines, other views are coming out. So when a person is teaching the Dhamma nowadays, not just nowadays, but for centuries, how much of that they're sharing, they're writing about is real Dhamma? Everybody has a chip on their shoulder, as the saying goes. Everybody has their own agenda these days, especially. They want to push this agenda, that agenda, and they squeeze it through this thing called their own idiosyncrasies, their own ideas and beliefs, while at the same time making it seem like, even to deceive themselves, that they are truly the student of this teacher. And this is why I was saying, why do we do that? Oftentimes it's because of our likes and dislikes, how we feel. Again, we go back to the Brahmajala Sutta. It is how we feel towards something that will make us look for ways to justify that feeling, and we can come up with all kinds of theories and ideas and as to why this is a wonderful thing. But then it's paper thin, especially in the presence of a teacher like the Buddha, as we will see in a few minutes. That paper thin wall will come down so fast, and the student will break away. As we saw with Arita, he was expelled. He never admitted his mistake in the Alagadupama Sutta. We're going to see the same with Sāti, because the person is so staunchly holding on to their views and beliefs. This is the problem. This is like you're being in the room with a person who's there to help you, the physician, and they're giving you the cure, the diagnosis and the cure for the sickness. It's up to the sick person, the patient, to take it or not. That's why a teacher can speak the Dhamma until the cows come home, as the saying goes in English. But it's not going to land. Why? Because the student is holding on to their beliefs. That's a waste of time for the teacher, at least. So, which requires clarification, at least for the sake of the others who are there, as we'll see. Then, on witnessing this, those bhikkhus eagerly endeavored to release Sāti, the son of a fisherman, from his wrong and convolutedly evil view. in his misrepresentation of the Dhamma. In this way, they tried and tried to challenge him as they questioned and then cross-questioned him on various aspects of the Dhamma in an effort to convince him to relinquish his evil interpretations by telling him, "Friend Sāti, do not make such false statements. Do not misrepresent the Blessed One. For it is wrong to be stating what is completely untrue, to say things that have nothing to do with the Blessed One, because the Blessed One would never say or teach such things. On the contrary, the Blessed One has declared repeatedly and in countless different ways, while explaining in detail how consciousness itself is dependently arisen. After all, there cannot be any consciousness manifesting or taking place without its necessary causes and conditions. Paccaya. Paccaya is the conditionality of things. Earlier, I was saying we like to simplify, we like to put things into, Disney-esque way of thinking, fairy tale-like, because most of us are emotionally immature. We don't like to spend the energy to probe things. And that explains the world as, in the state that it is in today. People are not standing up. People are not speaking out what is wrong with the world, with their communities. For that reason, they keep relinquishing their rights and liberties and freedoms. Yeah, sure. I don't want to spend time thinking about it. I'll trust you. I'll trust you. Yeah, go ahead. It sounds nice. It makes me feel nice. If you're ever in sales, if you're studying to become a better and best salesman in your team, you will be taught from day one, from the first lecture, first workshop, that people buy because of how they feel. So you're selling emotions. If you've done any sales, you know that to be the case. So similarly here, people go by how they feel. And to not ask questions keeps you in the delusion that, yes, I can perpetuate this feeling, irrespective of how false it is and where it will lead you. Not might, but it will lead you. Sāti didn't care. He wanted that sense of fake confidence that, yes, I know it's concrete. Yes, it's the same soul going from life to life. However, when you're bringing in the paccaya principle, conditionality, how things are dependently arisen, which is paticca-samuppada, then it's not so simple of a small chunk, bite-sized instruction or teaching you could give to people and they can believe you. That's why the Dhamma is not a belief system. It requires the person to think. Paticca-samuppada has nothing to do with belief systems, nor about repetitions of, yes, avidya paccaya sankara. No, it's not like that. People go on, millions of us, Buddhists, go on repeating. Because of this, that happens. Because of this, intellectual acrobatics, without putting the effort to understand. What does that mean to be dependently arisen? That means there's variables here. Conditions have to be there in order for this particular consciousness to take place, to arise. This is challenging all other religious systems, all of them. That's why not everyone understands the Buddha's teachings, unfortunately, because we don't like to put the effort to understand, just like Sāti. And they continue. Actually, they said that. And then, but despite all their fervent efforts at trying to persuade the Bhikkhu Sāti, the son of a fisherman, they could not have him give up his obstinate attachment to his wrong and convolutedly evil view. Even though they tried pressing him with probing questions and cross-questioning, thus he staunchly held on to his wrong view, tenaciously insisting on his misinterpretation and misunderstanding of the Dhamma, claiming it to be correct. Then, on realizing that they were unable to dissuade him from his wrong and convolutedly evil view and misrepresentation of the Dhamma, those bhikkhus went and approached the Blessed One. And once having paid homage to the teacher, they sat to one side and began reporting on what had taken place with the bhikkhu Sāti, the son of a fisherman, while adding, "Therefore, Bhante, the bhikkhu Sāti, who previously had made his living by catching and selling fish, still refuses to give up his wrong and convolutedly evil view, despite our efforts at trying to convince and press him." So basically, they're repeating that. And then it says, realizing that we were unsuccessful in our efforts to dissuade him from his wrong and evil views, we decided that we must report the matter to the Blessed One himself. And that is the appropriate way of dealing. They are not, as the saying goes, vernacular goes, snitching on him. No. They realize with foresight that this is dangerous. I mean, if he's living all by himself in the middle of the woods and never coming across any other human being, or any being for that matter, to teach his wrong views to, perhaps somebody might be forgiven to say, well, just leave him with his wrong views. But the bhikkhus will interact with lay people sooner or later. Sooner or later, they're going to open their mouths and teach some Dhamma. But this is not Dhamma. This is poison. That means other minds will be poisoned. This takes responsibility. This takes accountability on the part of the bhikkhus who tried to help him, who tried to dissuade him from his wrong views. That means they also have to come out of their comfort zone, which is not something that happens today anymore. People love to sit in their own comfort zones, and they don't want to challenge that. They don't want to take a risk, go out on a limb for the truth. People don't do that as much. At least bhikkhus don't. Monastics, which we are supposed to be the custodians of the Dhamma, really. But the Buddha never said only the bhikkhus are. Lay people can and are, in my view, modern day custodians. I have seen this in my life, in the lives of students. Then, once this was reported, the Blessed One addressed a certain bhikkhu by instructing him, "Go now, bhikkhu, and in my name tell that bhikkhu Sāti, the son of a fisherman, that the teacher is calling for him." "Yes, Bhante," that bhikkhu replied as he went to the bhikkhu Sāti and informed him, "The teacher is calling for you, friend Sāti." "Yes, friend," replied the bhikkhu Sāti as he went and approached the Blessed One. So now he is summoned and he's there. Then, after paying homage to the teacher, he sat down to one side. And the Blessed One began questioning him. "Sāti, is what we heard true? That you have been promoting such wrong and convolutedly evil views by declaring, the way I have come to see and understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, there is an unchanging essence, which is the very same consciousness that keeps wandering and cycling through the rounds of rebirth. It cannot be otherwise." And Sāti, the son of a fisherman, replied by saying, "That statement is true, Bhante. For that is exactly the way I have come to understand the Dhamma as taught by the Blessed One." That is, so basically he repeats his conviction. So he admitted it. The Blessed One then asked, "And what exactly is that consciousness, Sāti? Point it to me, basically. Where is it? What does it look like?" "Bhante, it is that which is able to speak, feel, and experience the results of both good and bad actions, while in the various realms of existence." On hearing this confirmation, the Blessed One admonished him by chastising, "You stupid and useless idiot. Where did you come up with such a devastatingly absurd notion? To whom exactly was it that you witnessed us teach the Dhamma in such a manner?" Foolish man, have I not on countless occasions repeatedly instructed, taught, and declared in so many ways, while explaining in detail to you all how consciousness itself is dependently arisen? Because there cannot be any consciousness manifesting or taking place without its necessary causes and conditions. Yet, you stupid and worthless idiot, through your own deluded and convolutedly wrong understanding, have been going ahead and misrepresenting us with your evil notions and conclusion. And as a result, you fool, now you have severely harmed and injured yourself, while accumulating such heavy and painful karmic burdens with terrible demerits that your actions have now accrued, all of which will work against you and to your own detriment and suffering for a very long time to come indeed. This is also reminding us of the Alagadupama, the handling of the venomous water snake. Sāti, just like Arita, handled the Dhamma wrong. He handled it from the tail or from the body. You do not do that, because the head will turn around and bite you and kill you. Sāti didn't know that, didn't care, in fact. Because for him, it was just another teaching, another thing that you read somewhere, and then you feel good about it, so you just follow it and make a living getting free food, this and that, while you're promoting your Upanishadic beliefs. Because you don't engage your thoughts and you don't engage your understanding, and you're definitely not practicing. Another thing that, something that I didn't mention so far is the impact of wrong view on your meditation. We never consider whether our wrong views could possibly have an impact on our meditative practice. My very simple litmus test to that would be, if you're not developing, there is wrong view somewhere. Check your views. And by that same token, check your attachments. Sāti, did you notice? Just being questioned, is it true that you follow this, by his own bhikkhu, fellow bhikkhus? If he had some smarts, some intelligence, he would have said, what do you think? But he was staunchly holding on to his position. And then what? They were forced to share, like to explain to him, give examples, you bring in similes that the Buddha used to try to dissuade him from that position, wrong view. He stood his ground of idiocy, stupidity, to maintain his cultural value. See how dangerous cultural values can be? Because sooner or later, you're going to come across a position, a fork in the road, where you're going to try to choose your culture or the Dhamma. Guess what most people will choose? They will choose their race. They will choose their, I don't know, something as silly as sexual orientation, their gender, their political views, because that's a soft spot for them. That's a no-no. You don't go there. I was expecting the Dhamma, accepting the Dhamma to this point, but no, not from this point, because that is a critical point for the person to face the mirror and say, what am I doing? I'm revealing my opinion, my position towards the Dhamma, in fact. It doesn't mean as much as this other thing, like culture. I've seen this a lot. Where push comes to shove, the person will choose to hold on to their race, to their cultural baggage, identifications with a certain cultural group. Well, you are now in that culture, in this birth. What if you took a peek into your past life and you were not part of this culture? We don't think about that, but the Dhamma carries through. Hopefully, you have right intentions to sprout when you do end up in a next life somewhere where there's a semblance of the Dhamma, where you have hope, you have some hope, possibility, and your intentions will help you, but not when you are holding on to wrong views. People don't understand the value of the Dhamma deeply. It's not some curiosity that you are fulfilling, that you came across in this life and you're just like, yeah, we match, we vibe together. The Dhamma is the only closest thing that, it's a good belief system. It's a good way of looking at life. Yeah, but that's still so foreign. You have not made it part and parcel of your very being to understand and to improve upon your state as a person who's undergoing difficulties, pain, and to really use it to cut yourself free from that becomings. That's what Nibbana is. Nibbana is the cessation of becoming, ending, cutting the cord for further becoming. What Sāti is doing is perpetuating, in fact, tightening, putting more glue on that cord because of his beliefs. Then, while addressing the bhikkhus, the Blessed One spoke these words. And what about you, bhikkhus? What is your position regarding this issue? He wants to make sure, how many satis might there be other than this one? Which is really dangerous. And this is another reason why the Buddha did not want to teach in the first place, because it can easily be misconstrued, misunderstood, mispromulgated, wrongly taught, which causes more damage, because you're going to have a lot of people holding the water snake from the tail, and a lot of people are going to be in pain, and they're going to die, and they're going to waste their lives. Who knows how long they're going to have, loiter around in samsara, go through so much pain until one day they might come across the Dhamma again. Who knows how long? And he continues to ask, now he's interrogating the other bhikkhus. He says, do you think that this bhikkhu Sāti, the son of a fisherman, who previously made his living by catching and selling fish, has a spark of any level of discerning wisdom in him? Has he truly gained any level of higher understanding or insight in this Dhamma and discipline at all? Is there a snippet of wisdom in this guy, you think? And those bhikkhus exclaimed with their fervent response, no way, Bhante. How could he, Blessed Lord, seeing that it would surely be an impossibility for him? There is no way that he has gained any level of higher understanding or insight whatsoever in this Dhamma and discipline. Meanwhile, as this was being said, the bhikkhu Sāti, who previously had made his living by catching and selling fish, now sat there quietly and glum, unable to speak a word, being dumbstruck and completely embarrassed and utterly humiliated for having committed such a grave mistake. He's caught, but that doesn't mean that he admitted it. He's embarrassed because he's surrounded by a majority that sees through his ignorance, and they just called him out. Then, on witnessing this, the Blessed One spoke to him once more by saying, you foolish and worthless idiot, you will certainly be recognized by your own very deluded and devastatingly harmful views with which you went misrepresenting this dispensation. Sasana dispensation. Now I shall further question the rest of the bhikkhus on this matter. Now, you have several occasions throughout the suttas where a bhikkhu, this is not rare, bhikkhus as people make mistakes, especially when it came to the Dhamma. Some clarification had to be given somewhere. So the humility and modesty and self-effacing attitude is crucial. is part of the training, in fact, patipada, where you don't take yourself too seriously, especially in the presence of the Buddha. So the Buddha just showed me, let's say I'm Sāti, my mistake, my erroneous, terrible, evil, wrong view. Evil because it misleads people, not just me, others too. Well, what if that person dies with that view? Just like Aritta. Well, now I am responsible for that in a way, in many ways, in fact. So here, Sāti did not come forward and say, Bhante, may the blessing of may the Blessed One forgive me for my terrible, terrible mistake, my stupidity, my ignorance. I was completely, utterly foolish to promote such a view, Bhante. He never did that. Otherwise, the Buddha would have, like in many cases, the Buddha would say, yes, that was foolish. And that was wrong and evil view. But this sasana grows every time a person realizes their mistake and takes steps to never make it, to never repeat it again. And the Buddha would forgive, and that's the end of it. And perhaps that would have been an opportunity to teach the Dhamma to Sāti, and maybe even get him to attain a level of awakening, at least a Sotapanna status. But we don't see that from Sāti. And that's why we see the Buddha continuing on his barrage of chastisement, rebuking Sāti. Because his arrogance, we think that the Buddha's presence is enough for a student to just go melting in front of the Buddha. No, ignorance is very thick, dark, slimy. And it requires a lot of conceit to maintain that sliminess. And that's what Sāti is doing in the presence of the Sangha, in the presence of the Buddha himself. Imagine that. Well, today we have that, a lot of it. Because if you have the Dhamma, which, as you can see, we do, Lord Buddha said, when there is Dhamma, it's the same as having the Buddha. Nobody followed. There was nobody second in command, after the Buddha died, so the Sangha's leader became somebody else. No, we never had that. The Dhamma, however, the Buddha established, is that. So we have the Dhamma, which is equivalent to having the Buddha amongst us. Now, do you have a better perspective as to the water snake? How respectful we have to be towards it, the Dhamma, as you would in the presence of the Buddha. We don't see that with Sāti. That's why the door is closed for him, because he has shut his heart. He has shut his conceit is too much. His dedication to his previous cultural values, understandings, and views are too strong. Do you have such things in your life? Perhaps a self-image that I'm a worthless person, that I don't deserve this, or terrible things are going to happen to me, or the opposite. Having this conceited view about yourself, never being wrong, or all your choices being relatively correct. What might be yours? This sutta is also asking such questions of us, from ourselves. And then the Buddha says, now I shall further question the rest of the bhikkhus on this matter. And by addressing the bhikkhus, the Blessed One then continued by saying, and how do you, bhikkhus, understand the Dhamma that I have been teaching you thus far? Do you hold the view held by this bhikkhu Sāti, who previously, again, he's going to mention this, who made his living by catching and selling fish? And the way he has been grabbing onto his convolutedly wrong understanding, with which, by the way, selling fish was looked down upon, because they didn't necessarily, not everyone had soap, and not everyone showered every day. So if you work with fish, this and that, cleaning them and selling them, dealing with fish, you stunk of fish. The odor of fish was with you wherever you went. So people knew who the fishermen were. So there is that also cultural nuance of India at the time attached to this. And some commentators have mentioned that. And the way he has been grabbing onto his, but the handling of the fish is the least of his worries. It's the handling of his views that's the problem, because you can wipe off, you can use enough of a strong detergent or type of a soap to cleanse yourself from the odor and the smell of fish. But what are you going to do with your wrong views? There's not a strong enough of a detergent or a soap to cleanse us of the views if we're refusing to relinquish them. The Dhamma, however, gives us all the tools to scrape them off if we choose to. And the way he has been grabbing onto his convolutedly wrong understanding with which he has been going around and misrepresenting us, using his evil notions and conclusion, harming and injuring himself in the process while accumulating such heavy and painful karmic burdens with terrible demerits, which his actions have now accrued, all of which will work against him and to his own detriment and suffering for a very long time to come. And those bhikkhus replied by exclaiming, "Absolutely not, Bhante. After all," so he was asking, "Are you the same view as him?" They say, "Absolutely not, Bhante. After all, on countless occasions, the Blessed One has repeatedly instructed, taught, and declared to us, and in so many ways, while explaining in detail how consciousness itself is dependently arisen." You can almost feel the Buddha's, he wasn't affected by any of this, of course, but as a normal teacher who's been teaching the students, and then they finally say, because you're surrounded by such ignorance from Sāti, "No, Bhante," you have some students who get up and give you the right answer. "Things are dependently arisen, Bhante. You've taught us that." And the teacher goes, "Oh, so my efforts were not all in vain. Some people got it." And that's what the Buddha wants to know. Are you guys getting it? What is this? How is this happening? Because there cannot be any consciousness manifesting or taking place without its necessary causes and conditions. Pachaya. And the Buddha says, "Sadhu, sadhu." Very good, bhikkhus. It is truly good that you all understand the Dhamma in this manner. After all, on countless occasions, I have repeatedly instructed, taught, and declared to you in so many ways, while explaining in detail how consciousness itself is dependently arisen, because there cannot be any consciousness manifesting or taking place without its necessary causes and conditions. Yet, this stupid and worthless idiot, through his own deluded and convolutedly wrong understanding, has been going ahead and misrepresenting us with his evil notions and conclusion. And as a result, this fool has now severely harmed and injured himself while accumulating such heavy and painful karmic burdens with terrible demerits, which his actions have now accrued, all of which will work against him and to his own detriment and suffering for a very long time to come. So here is the next section. Perhaps we'll do that and see how long that was. I forgot how long this section was. But anyhow, here is the Buddha's clarification series of instructions he will give to really lock it in, as the saying goes, for the student. And anyone who might have had some questions or some glitches in their own understanding or perception of conditionality, principle of conditionality, dependent arising, or paticca-samuppada, then this series of questions will help the student and help us. So, the second section, I call it, consciousness is conditional. Now he goes, Bhikkhus, dependent on whatever condition whereby a consciousness arises, by that very condition it is reckoned. Hence, that consciousness itself comes to manifest by that particular condition. So, depending on the condition, this thing takes place. Because of this, this happens. Things don't fall out of the sky. But that is what other traditions, philosophies take as a given, explain as a given. You have to blindly believe that. But this is not a path of beliefs. This requires us to be in the driver's seat, behind the steering wheel of our lives. You cannot function, though, behind the steering wheel, guiding the car, the direction of where the car is going to go, meaning your life, without taking ownership of how you think about things. Do you see how it is far easier for people to stick their head into the ground, willfully ignoring the facts of life, of why they're feeling suffering, avoiding all that, sticking their head into the sand like an ostrich, and saying, no, I believe this, and hoping that that will sort things out for you. The hell realms, the animal realms, the asura realms, the peta realms are full of such people who used to be human, as we were in all of these realms. We just don't remember them. So the Buddha continues. In other words, a consciousness that arises dependent on the I and visible forms is reckoned as I consciousness. Dependent on what? The I consciousness, the seeing. Dependent on what? There needs to be at least an I and a visible object that is visible, that could be seen. These things, when they're there in the same vicinity, that is going to be their, in a sense, product. That's going to bring it about. But the I consciousness did not fall from the sky. It didn't manifest. It was not revealed out of the blue. It requires its causes. The causes here are a visible object and an I, a functioning I. At the very least, these two things have to be there, Buddha says. A consciousness that arises dependent on the ear and sound is reckoned as ear consciousness. A consciousness that arises dependent on the nose and odors is reckoned as nose consciousness. A consciousness that arises dependent on the tongue and flavors is reckoned as tongue consciousness. A consciousness that arises dependent on the body and tactile objects or tangibles is reckoned as body consciousness. A consciousness that arises dependent on the mind and mind objects is reckoned as mind consciousness. Now, this is where it really becomes relevant, because it's so beautiful that the Buddha never held back from using similes and metaphors. It's the highest form of teaching, using verbal language, or even concepts. When it is being given, the meaning of it is becoming apparent, shown through the means of metaphor. Nobody comes close to the Buddha. Nobody in history, in any tradition, where he did not hold back. He uses so many metaphors. And so many arahants became arahants because of them hearing or reading or listening to a metaphor given by the Buddha, a simile given by the Buddha. That's why you have so many of them throughout the suttas. Now listen to what it says. Bhikkhus, just like a fire is reckoned by the specific condition or nutriment as its fuel, dependent on which it burns, such as a fire that burns dependent on logs is reckoned as a log fire. A fire that burns dependent on faggots and sticks is reckoned as a faggot fire. A fire that burns dependent on dry grass is reckoned as a dry grass fire. A fire that burns dependent on cow dung is reckoned as a cow dung fire. A fire that burns dependent on chaff is reckoned as a chaff fire. A fire that burns dependent on rubbish is reckoned as a rubbish fire. If you look at any of these fuels as such, when you light up plastic, you see this happen in different parts of the world. I've seen this in Eastern Europe. I've seen this in Bali, a beautiful place. You're sitting there, all of a sudden you're getting this terrible smell coming in because a farmer or the caretakers, to get rid of all the plastic stuff, they're burning, and the paper and all that, along with the grass and twigs and things that they need to get rid of, they're releasing all this smoke. And sometimes it would come into my kuti, into my room. Woof, you have to shut the windows, even though the beautiful scenery is there. But then it's different when dry grass is being burned. The smell of it tells me what type of fuel they're using. If it's some type of a petroleum base like plastic or even like diesel or gasoline, it's different. You see the color different. If it's butane gas that's burning, is different. If it's kerosene gas as the fuel, it's different. If it's benzene or gasoline, it's different color. If it's cow dung, it's different. Now, logically, with common sense, looking at these things, we know, it makes sense. It's a no-brainer, as the saying goes, right? But we never look upon our own sensory perceptions, or like the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, etc., in the same way. See, the Dhamma compartmentalizes in a wise way human experience. And that's the only way that you can release yourself, abandon this wrong view of belief systems, of taking things just because out of faith or something like that. No. That's why there's no blind faith in the Dhamma. You have to understand what it is that you are basing your life upon. Even something as observable as maintaining sila. You have to understand why I'm practicing sila. Why am I taking precepts every day? Or why is it in the case of a monk, why do we have training rules? I have to understand, which requires using your head, putting some effort, basically. So you're compartmentalizing. Okay, this is the fire. It's not just any fire. It's fire. Yeah, it's just to make things simple. But what kind of fire? Well, let me look at the color. Let me see the smell of it. How much heat does it generate? How fast does it burn, right? If it's airplane or jet fuel, it will burn very fast. Very fast. Compared to diesel. Compared to a piece of plastic. Compared to crude oil. But they're all fire. Yeah, but not exactly. We have to look at the type of fuel. That's where you get close to understanding paccaya, what paccaya or conditionality means. And the Buddha continues, in just the same manner, a consciousness that arises dependent on the eye and visible forms is reckoned as eye consciousness. A consciousness that arises dependent on the ear and sound is reckoned as ear consciousness. A consciousness that arises on the nose and odors is reckoned as nose consciousness. The consciousness that arises dependent on the tongue and flavors is reckoned as tongue consciousness. A consciousness that arises dependent on the body and tactile objects or tangibles is reckoned as body consciousness. A consciousness that arises dependent on the mind and mind objects is reckoned as mind consciousness. He just explained it to us by giving by giving us the examples, the metaphors of or the metaphor of fire, but in different states depending on the nutriment, which we will get to see later, because the Buddha will be addressing the specifically also nutriments, what we call in the Dhamma, the dispensation of the Buddha, as ahara, fuels or nourishment or nutriment that sustains, as in the case of food, for example, physical, actual food. I want now we've gotten to the third section, questions and answers pertaining to becoming. But you might have guessed I'm not going to be pushing my way through by speeding up how fast we go through the sutta, because it is a beautiful field of Dhamma for us to extract as much as we can, because you can find the whole entire Dhamma in this sutta, the different teachings, the different principles. But instead of rushing through, I'd rather we do it at a slower pace, because I really would like or want to have you guys to really let it get settled in the mind. And questions might come up, which I want to give, see if you have any questions and address them prior to continuing, and maybe continue from next week on if there are several questions, which are totally understandable if they occur. So are there any questions, comments? Yes.
Bante, thank you. I'm going to try and formulate the question correctly, because there's a lot going on. It seems like the mind has got. I'm trying to work out the relationship between Paticca Samuppada and consciousness arising in the body, for instance. It feels almost like my understanding of it is that once you're past the point of contact, the mind, it's almost as if there's like another stream of dependent origination going on, which is to do with the mind. Trying to formulate it correctly. So, is it just almost like constant, because the mind's like putting the attention there in the first place? That's why you're aware of this bodily contact happening. So, is the mind? Is it just? Is this dependent origination happening like side to side, flicking between both experience? You know, like the part that knows what's going on, recognizing it. That's obviously not this like permanent thing that Sati's claiming, but you can almost understand why he's so deluded about that. You know,
Why do you think he's so deluded about that? What makes you say that? I'd like to probe your mind here.
yeah, okay.
It's not a trick
Support.
question. I just
No. Yeah. It's difficult to separate the knowing. Yeah, I mean, it boils down to contact on the body. That's as far as I can probably articulate it, Bante. It's all. I don't know how to put it into words. The I suppose it's because it's almost as if the mind runs away with it past the point of contact. I guess that's probably about as good as I can do, Bante.
why would the mind be allowed to run with it,
Um,
run through with it? What would necessitate that, you think?
um, the the adherence to the perceptions that are arising, I guess, and you know, fueling that, putting your attention there,
Hmm.
I guess.
Well, we have to first be willing to abandon our views and perceptions about what we understand about the Dhamma all the time. So you're always working in the laboratory of the present moment. And the Dhamma is right there. The Dhamma is to be tested by us. So you're always in the investigative mode of functioning. And the simple term to be used to describe that process is Sāti, or Sati, actually, not Sāti. Sati meaning mindfulness. That's why the way we understand mindfulness is a lot deeper than what it has turned into in the common parlance in the world. So mindfulness requires you to look, and specifically when we're practicing vipassana, we are looking at the very mechanism that is at play. So without letting the consciousness to run through with it, meaning, let me take a step back. Each one of the links that we have learned, studied, heard about, seen, explained, etc., has within it, in order for it to be perpetuated, in order for it to continue on, it needs to have the presence of ignorance. Ignorance doesn't happen. It's specifically what I'm referring to is avidya, which I translate as, willfully ignoring, which is the opposite of sati. Sati says, hold on, I want to see what's going on. Willful ignoring says, I got this, it's okay, let's trust this. I mean, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. This Bhikkhu, who didn't deserve the title, Bhikkhu, by the way, Sāti, was the second camp. He wasn't curious to know what's causing this. I'm just taking this thing, consciousness, as a thing. So the danger is, and this is my reference to basically why I use the term, we have to relinquish our perceptions about the Dhamma, specifically about Paticcasamuppada, because some people are stuck on, in order for it to be dependent origination, dependent arising, or Paticcasamuppada, it has to have 12 links. That's when it fits their whole narrative. Okay, now it's the Paticcasamuppada the Buddha talks about. Well, the Buddha talked about Paticcasamuppada in 8 links, 9 links, less sometimes, in different suttas, depending on the context. The linkages, separate linkages don't matter. What matters is what is leading this to that. Specifically, you mentioned about contact. Consciousness, take out these names, contact or consciousness, right? Consciousness in the form of alayatana or salayatana, which show up, right? You have nama rupa on one end. And then further, you look back and you see, oh, there's vijnana. All these things, consciousness. And then, as it was in the bundles of reeds in the sutta where Venerable Sariputta was doing a Q&A with Venerable Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya, he says, vijnana and namarupa. Because of this happened. Now, people get stuck. Because they say, okay, so I'm now answering that section where in your question where you said, does it go side by side in a linear fashion, basically? So a person who's thinking only in terms of linearity will look at the role of vijnana. Okay, now you have nama rupa showing up, name and form. So they're expecting to see something else. Definitely not vijnana to show up on the other end, because they're thinking linearly. And Venerable Sariputta says, no. Namarupa exists because of vijnana. Vijnana exists because of Namarupa. Whoa, that's too much for many people, because they have conceived the principle of conditionality in a linear fashion. That is dangerous. And that is putting us in the same vicinity as Sāti, the son of a fisherman, in his misunderstanding of the Dhamma. But when you look around in your life, in your own experience, you see that it is multifaceted, isn't it? It's non-linear. That's why they're all over the place. That's why when there is the absence of Sati, there is a continuation of existence, of becoming. Because Sati is the thing that is allowing us to break the chain. Now, of course, there's also the fact that once you pass a certain point, you pass the point of no return. In the lineage or the linkages of the Paticca Samuppada, I don't want it to be too overwhelming for listeners here, but basically, contact happens. Why? Because Salayatana is there, the six sense organs are there. And okay, contact happens here because of the six senses, six sense spheres, eye, ear, nose, etc. Mind even. So contact happens because of the presence of these six. But where does contact lead to? Feeling. Feeling happens. And for that, the Buddha simplifies it for us by saying there's essentially three types of feelings. Pleasurable or pleasant feeling, unpleasant or painful feeling, and neutral feeling, a combination of both. So they cancel each other out and end up being neutral feeling, which is the majority types of feelings we have and we experience. Well, do we notice them? We don't. But they're still happening through the Salayatana, aren't they? Because of the six senses, we are experiencing the neutral, but guess what? We are not there to see or witness them. Why? Because there's no sati. Why? Because there is willful ignoring. Avijja. So avijja is within each of the links. That's why avijja paccaya sankhara, which people say, oh, it's the first link. No, it's not. It's circular. People say, oh, it starts here. Yeah, it starts here. Once you hit the point of craving or tanha, done. You're done for. And there's another life waiting for you. That's way too simplistic. That's something you tell a kid watching Disney movies. That's not for us. You need to go deeper into understanding the relationship between the links. How is this some way answering your question, your query?
Yes, Bhante. Yeah, it takes quite a lot more contemplation, but yeah.
What might still don't be nice, by the way. Don't try to. If it's not making sense, you have to tell me so I can endeavor more to clarify.
Yeah, I mean it's deep, yeah, and it's probably highlighting where I haven't been anywhere near deep enough in my practice to understand, but it needs to be applied more than anything, actually. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's an accurate estimation of what it takes. But remember, this is your sitting practice is helpful to calm the mind down so that it doesn't make you feel overwhelmed, because if you don't approach it correctly, it can create agitation. And we would be like that farmer who's sitting on his donkey counting his herd of donkeys, expecting to see 100 heads of donkeys, but he always comes out one short. He counts always 99, meaning he never looks at the donkey he's sitting on. So while we're experiencing or we're undergoing the thinking, probing deeply of the Dhamma, we oftentimes forget as to what is happening in the very state that we're in at that time as we're pondering these possibilities or trying to rationally penetrate by allowing ourselves to see what could be the meaning behind this. What is the Buddha saying here? So that tension blocks us from seeing. But when you're practicing true satipatthana, you need to turn the camera back onto yourself. This is what we call cittanupassana or dhammanupassana. You're looking at the mind. You're looking at, because that's the key. That's where paticca samuppada is happening. Paticca samuppada does not happen because you start to think about it at a certain date when you have the time. It's happening all the time. We never pause to see it taking place, however. When I am in the right mood, when I have, calm head and relaxed, and, I don't have any phone calls, no emails to respond to, this and that, I can dedicate, okay, so the Dhamma is now revealing itself, but it's happening all the time. So paticca samuppada is not a special thing that happens a certain time because you give it attention. It's happening constantly. Why? Because you're still living, well, thanks to the six sense spheres, always are active. So, and this is another way of understanding where the Buddha says, and Venerable Sariputta says, he who understands the paticca samuppada sees the Dhamma. He who understands the Dhamma truly, fully, properly, genuinely, is a person who's seeing the paticca samuppada. That's the danger in whether it was Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya Sutta or in this sutta, where it might seem too simplistic, the explanation that the Buddha gives of I and visible forms. You have I consciousness. So for a person who's very logical minded, rational thinking, it says, yeah, so what's the big deal? So they just take the words, concepts, and that's it. So it never gets internalized. It never becomes part of your living experience. Viscerally to see paticca samuppada, that is what I am trying to highlight here by saying that it is ongoing, it's constant. We don't pay attention to it. Paticca samuppada does not happen in a book, in a lecture, in a Dhamma discourse like this. It comes alive when you give it the attention it deserves. And that is the thing which separates us, non-arahants, from the arahants. So my encouragement here, therefore, is for you to steer yourself in that direction, to be curious. I wonder how, because I like to give you things that are practical, that you could use, tools that, okay, how can I, all that, put all that into one technique. Is there a technique for this? Yeah, when you're experiencing life, especially in those peak moments, whether it's a good peak moment or a terrible peak moment, or, peak and spike and a drop. Those are the pleasurable moments, pleasurable feelings, pleasant feelings, and the other one can be categorized as painful feeling. Those are obvious ones. So you look at those and you say, why do I feel so exhilarated now? What is that? That's a feeling, isn't it? Okay, feeling. Why did this happen? Because I saw this email. I received this notification. I whatever. I heard this lovely news. What is that? That is contact. How did I hear it? Oh, because I have a hearing. I paid attention to this. And then there was the ear consciousness. So now you're bringing it out of the text. You're bringing it out of the teaching and you're making it part of your life. You need to do this with every aspect of your life. The more you do, the more you bring or breathe life into paticca samuppada as far as you're concerned. and it becomes relevant. It has meaning. Most people think of Paticcasamuppada as something, in order for you to grasp it, know it, understand it, you have to be able to write a dissertation on it. No, you don't. Many of the arahants were illiterate. But they did something that we do not usually do. Bring your awareness and bring the Dhamma into your life. And the simple things, tasks that you undergo and engage in doing. That sounds something that is doable?
Bhante, you asked me after the first mini teaching there if I got it, but actually that was really helpful. I'm really glad that you continued on and you could see where I wasn't getting it. Especially when you brought in about how I was like currently feeling. That was just almost like a because I put my attention on that at that moment. It was almost like a mini like frame of. It was obviously like dependent origination. It was lovely. So yeah, but thank you for that. Like just obviously just like a mini little grasp of it. But yeah, thank you for making it practical. Yeah,
it's existentially real. Paticcasamuppada, and by the same token, the Dhamma. It's not an intellectual endeavor, which is so we're tempted to think that it is. We believe that it is, but so long as we do, we live separate from the Dhamma. It doesn't touch us. We don't allow it, and that's one of the primary reasons why we do not attain. People are not attaining states of nobility. That means Sotapatti, Sakadagami, Anagami, Arahantship today because of this, because we're too top heavy in our thoughts, in our perceptions about the Dhamma, about what these things mean and are. So we're holding on to our views tightly, saying this is what it has to be. Versus, let me see, right now I'm feeling quite agitated. I'm feeling very upset. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling very happy. But in those moments, we push the Dhamma away and say, no, let me bask in this. Even if it's a bad experience, let me sit down, journal over this, or, talk to my friends over this. And it's like, let me just, cuddle up with this experience. And then I'll get to the Dhamma once I see many smiling faces. Because, yeah, that's what we normally do. But those are the juicy, very fertile, nutritious fields and soil for us to really examine the validity of the Dhamma. And only in those moments is it possible for us to penetrate and see the Dhamma, gain understanding. Any of the levels, the noble 8 levels of nobility, require a higher level of understanding that must take place. It's not a trance. To become a Sotapanna, you have to experience a higher state of understanding. That was simply unprecedented. Never happened to you before, ever. That's why you can attain Sotapatti only once. You can attain Sakadagami only once. You attain Anagami only once. And you attain Arahantship only once. It's a bump up. It's a sudden jolt that's earth-shattering. And the person is no longer the same. Now they don't remember, oh yeah, I have to go and think like Sotapanna. I have to, so let me remind myself of being it doesn't work like that. The person has now gained a higher level of understanding. But that's not going to happen unless you look at your own life through the eyes of the Dhamma, what the Dhamma is teaching. You don't have to get too jumbled up in so many complex ideas and principles. No, just look at the words you use. Contact. Tassa. The Buddha says, To bhikkave vedeti. Butto sanjanati. Butto ceteti. It is through contact that one feels. Through contact, one perceives, ponders. And it is through contact that one intends. So contact has to happen. So try this experiment. Check to see how many times throughout your daily activities you're able to detect intentions, feelings, or perceptions that you're having during the day, and tracing it back to the point of contact that instigated it all, from which this feeling arose, from which this perception arose, from which this intentionality is arising. And already you're already far better off than where you were. This is part of the gradual training, progressive training, and this is what the path is. People asked to the Buddha I think in the book of the Eights, and there's a sutta where the Buddha is being asked, and whether awakening or enlightenment is sudden. A person attains, suddenly, and the Buddha corrects them and says, it's a gradual process. It's not a revelation that all of a sudden some being throws at you. It doesn't happen because of the grace of a God somewhere. That's all nonsense as it relates to the Dhamma. Through the lens of the Dhamma, all that is just kids' play, kindergarten stuff. And many people need that because many, majority of us will not be interested in putting this much effort. And that's why they will continue to roam about in samsara for countless mahakalpas, unimaginably long time periods, as they go from life to life into all these different realms, usually in the lower realms. Usually. So this path is about cessation of existence, cessation of re-becomings through the gaining of understanding. And the Dhamma is the only conduit, the only doorway, the only path that takes us there. So, yeah. Any other good question? Very intricate, very amorphous, very foggy, very, But then I'm glad we were able to make something out of it. Any thought, any other comments, questions?
Thank you, Bhante.
Of course.
You mentioned, you said the Dhamma compartmentalizes the human experience wisely, and it made me reflect how all these different consciousnesses are spoken about one at a time. And then I was just thinking, as I'm listening to you, there's the ear and the audible sound. So there's ear consciousness, but the mind is also engaging with a mind object, but that mind object is coming in dependent on the ear consciousness. And so they were also like this. And I was wondering if you could explain that.
A lovely way of trying to decipher and see the bigger picture. Because when we say compartmentalize, but I'm glad you were using the word wisely, compartmentalizing wisely. That's what the Dhamma does. Unfortunately, most of the time, we like to put information in tiny little boxes that are not interdependent. In a sense, like Sāti was doing, it's very separate in a sense. Like Sāti, having a soul, having a personhood, and that stays. It goes from, it's a consciousness that is changed, fixed from life to life. But as far as a person goes, it's very compartment. It's a boxed in type of an experience, which is in many, many, many ways, very infantile way of looking at things. It's very lazy. However, when you are presenting it the way you did just now, as you're listening, you're practicing Cittanupassana, and specifically you're practicing Dhammanupassana. You're looking at the 6 sense spheres. In fact, between the 2 specific ones, the ear and its connection to the mind, Manovinyana. Okay. What's happening? It's almost like, ping pong, table tennis, it's happening. Yeah, it's supposed to be ear consciousness. The ear, the attention I'm giving to the object, its audible sound, and I'm noticing the ear consciousness, but how am I interpreting that? That's one of the reasons why the Buddha always places the mind at a higher level compared to the other 5 sense spheres, because the mind is, after all, the interpreter. Think of it as the CPU of a central processing unit, or the motherboard of the computer. All things are going to have to pass through it. It needs to, again, compartmentalize it, as another term that we use in connection to these computer science and things like that. But to see the connection requires us to carefully delineate for ourselves, for our understanding, so that we can see exactly the connection. Interdependence also means connections. Bhante Nyanananda uses the example of, we always talk about dependent arising or paticcasamuppada in the form of links, chain links, right? But I love that he would use, to facilitate understanding of this principle better, he would take the middle link. Chitta used the link of contact, for example, right? So that would be the full link of the chain, 1, contact. But then it's connected to 2 other links, but he doesn't present it as full links. He shows it in his writing, in his explanations, as a half a chain. And half a chain of this, and half a chain of the other one. So one preceding and one post contact. That way, you can also connect better with the understanding of paticcasamuppada in the form of wisely compartmentalizing, just to give your intellect, because the intellect functions on analysis. But a lot of the Dhamma, the understanding of the Dhamma, the gaining of the Dhamma, even though we need the analysis portion, which is very much conscious part of the prefrontal cortex, but we also need intuitive understanding, which also relies on analysis. Without sounding metaphysical here, awakening happens through understanding, but all the pieces have to match. There has to be a balancing of the 7 factors of awakening, the bojjhanga, satta bojjhanga. But if the mind is agitated, that means there's no equanimity, which is the 7th of the 7 factors of awakening. If there's commotion, that means there's too much energy, you're too much endeavoring. That's why it's not going to come out as a result of that. So yes, we're using these compartmental views or images, not views, but images, concepts, to understand something that is far deeper than our normal, usual experience of life. But the objective here is to make it intelligible enough, practical enough, applicable enough for you to include it in your life, into your normal activities, such as the one that you pointed out. I'm hearing, I'm listening. There's attention, there's a sense sphere of the ear involving the object, the audible sound, and the ear itself, which is, as a result of those two, I am having the ear consciousness. Oh, but it is, like you did, interlinked. Yes. So the danger is to think about all these as compartments. That's wrong, I think. That's why people get stuck on the dependent arising, having 12 links, and you take out one link, they don't know what to do because they forget. They miss the whole forest for the trees because they don't realize that within each link, you have the whole Four Noble Truths. Each link represents the entire Paticcasamuppada. You understand one link, you understand it all. What the commentators did, unfortunately, starting with Venerable Buddhaghosa, who wrote Visuddhimagga, etc., many commentaries, what he missed was he divided the 12 links into 3 different lifetimes. Meaning the first, avidya, sankhara, etc., they fall outside your range of control. Because that's why, they're in the past life. They're not in the current life. What's in the current life? Well, you have the salayatana, you have the contact, of course. You have feeling. You have tanha, craving, and you have upadana. Okay? But then they went, sometimes they would include bhava there too, but other times they would just say, well, bhava then already takes you to birth, and that is not here in this life, so it's not in your control. So we're talking about a 3rd lifetime. Okay? And suffering and, jati, jaramaranang, old age, sickness and death, and all domanas, all those things. That's in the next life. So people then dissociated themselves from the Paticcasamuppada's relevance to the present life and what it means to one's own release and liberation from suffering. So no longer was it accessible. The Dhamma was no longer here and now. It no longer was sanditthiko. And that's a terrible, terrible thing that people do, including Venerable Buddhaghosa did, to mislead entire generations of people, because they took the Dhamma and they segregated into 3 different lifetimes. To this day, you have people, Mahatheras, who have graduated universities in Buddhist countries, mind you, with Buddhist degrees, who unfortunately continue such wrong view-based, misconstrued Dhamma, misleading them. So what we're doing here, going back to the sutta to show the relevancy, the immediacy of the Dhamma, that it is testable. So if you're able to look at your ear consciousness and see the connection of the mind conscious to that, where does that leave the compartmentalization? You now graduate. You now see the interdependence of the two. And then you look deeper to see if there's any dukkha there. Dukkha is always the telltale, the thing that tells you there's a fire. That scorching smell. There's a fire somewhere. To be able to detect, however, requires you to have sati. And to have sati means you have to be curious. Right? That's chanda. To have the fervent desire to, what's happening? Interest, fervent interest in understanding. Because what I've noticed usually happens when a student is trying to understand the Dhamma, specifically Paticcasamuppada, is they give up too soon. And they lose the interest. That's what I mean. They think, oh, this is for heavy duty intellectual level. I'm not that kind of a practitioner. Or I don't have to understand the whole entire Paticcasamuppada. I'll leave that for the other people. I'm just going to sit down and meditate. You put yourself in a different compartment now. You've just given up on that interest that requires us to have in order for panya to take place. And this ties in with what I was saying earlier. If people are not attaining, is because today's generation of people is because we are giving up too soon because we don't want to put the effort. People will gladly go and do 10-day retreats, silent retreats, which are very popular still for some reason. Sit there like a mummy in pain and torture. Yeah, show me what to do. Show me what to, yeah, I'll do it. But they will not spend 5 minutes trying to understand. Try to be with the body as it's going through the 4 positions. That requires curiosity. That requires fervent interest to observe. When you're having thoughts come and go, instead of following the thoughts, you're observing the thought as it arises, as it's maintained briefly, and as it's vanishing. But more importantly, you're looking at those gaps between each thought, because before the second one comes in, you have to be there observing it. What is happening there? Sāti was looking at it as a one continuous thing. Not just Sāti, of course, but others too. Is this addressing your question, Patachara? Is this helping?
It is helpful. You're bringing
Go ahead. Sorry.
You're bringing all these other factors that are other examples of how compartmentalization takes place. I think you said the mind is the chief of all these senses and sort of processes them or filters them, something like that.
Yes, and also if the mind is wrongly positioned, it also sullies the experience, filters it, adds what? Sannyas to it, and uses it as a jumping board, springboard for more stories, which now takes us to Papancha land, building up more and more mentally proliferating concepts, when it was just you hearing a sound. So here is where we truly practice adicitta, which takes us to adipanya, the higher level of mental cultivation. This requires you to be calmly probing the mind, the mechanism. That's how many people attained arahantship, just by using the same mechanism that you're highlighting, in essence. When you're observing, okay, many people attained while they were doing seemingly very ordinary, going through very ordinary activities, such as reaching over, to grab a cup, placing a bowl down, reaching over to extinguish the wick of an oil lamp, hearing a sound of, something like a tiny little twig falling from a tree. Such a mind basically is one that had been trained to not let things slip by. In other words, to practice the satipatthana. Satipatthana is not a thing external from us over there. It's not a specialization that is over there, away from here and what's happening here now. The most simplest things, activities, experiences you have in your daily life are conduits, are doorways for nibbana to occur, as evidenced by, that's a clinical term we would use in our report, right? Writing reports for patients in, clinical psychology and psychotherapy. So, as evidenced by the fact that all these arahants shared with verses of that moment of their awakening, simple events. Now, they weren't engaged in intellectual analysis. I said earlier about the importance of analysis, yes, but you will never attain by mere analysis. Analysis is important. It does the groundwork, but then you pull back once you've established an understanding of how this mechanism works. You don't have to know how the electricity goes through the walls, through the wires, what physics is taking place, what calculations are taking place the moment you hit a light switch and what's happening, and then the boom, the light bulb turns on. You don't have to know that. You just have to hit the button because you've already done the analysis. It's taken care of. Now you have to sit with the understanding of the relatedness of the process. So you understand the process as a whole. You don't have to go into it anymore. Oh, you see, because you're also reading your own body. Analysis, too much analysis will really give you a headache. But when you see the connection of the mind vis-a-vis the hearing that you mentioned, you're going to be able to see, but it was hearing. Now I'm over here talking, thinking about, pondering possibilities. And I've completely forgotten the contact that took place with the hearing, ear consciousness. I'm over here lost in my thoughts. With what? The mind. So this is what I mean by the mind being misled, misguided, because there's no wisdom. Because thinking itself, most of the time, is just wasteful. So for this reason, ultimately, the highest form of meditation object I give to people, not just me, because it's from the suttas, Lord Buddha would do this, is to have the mind experience animitta, the signless. No more perceptions. No more holding on to any object. And to use that quiet moment, equanimity. What the Buddha also uses the term sunyata, emptiness or the voidness. Voidness of what? Concepts, which is what? Nippapancha. You're no longer proliferating. So this is where you allow the hearing to just stay hearing. You're aware that you heard, just the hearing is taking place, but there's no after effect. There is no dialogue in the mind as a result of the contact of a hearing. No story building. There's this space of quietude. And you're simply seeing, oh, the light is going out as I extinguish. There might be a question, innocent question. Where does the light go? Where did the fire go? A moment ago it was here, now it's gone. Where did it go? Which direction? A term that the Buddha would use to explain to people nibbana. And that exact action is also a reference to nibbana. So the person now allows the space for the better comprehension of the groundwork that leads to the actual experiencing of nibbana. But you have to have that space. But so long as the mind is still active, agitated with thoughts, and using the six senses, including itself, pondering, memories, ideas, perceptions, keeps it active. And the active mind will not experience Nibbana, but requires mind with sati, with sampajanya, to look upon the mind, take a look at the mind doing these things and say, there's no panya here. It's agitated. And when there's agitation, there's what? There's heat. When there's heat, there's what? Dukkha. The mind does not want to let go of that thinking. What is that? Second noble truth. Craving. Not wanting to let go. But the moment you see that and you let go, you drop it, suddenly you realize cessation of the pain. Now, it's not a one-time thing. Usually you need to do it again and again, again and again throughout the day. That means throughout the day applying the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the fourth noble truth. And when you're applying it, it becomes so natural. The mind is always checking the quality of its own functioning. And that's where it feels comfortable. And the more you sit with this in meditation to bring about that sense of that state of peace, meaning sunyata, animitta ceto vimutti takes place, the signless freedom of the heart, of the mind. And the more you drop into that, you will be faster in realizing when and if the mind gets itself tangled up in residues of the other five senses, or itself with six senses. And your heart will say, oh, let me go back to that quiet. I like that better. It's less noisy. Now you're retreating into yourself, secluding yourself. And suddenly you are getting closer to the experience of Nibbana. Is this now making better sense?
It's so helpful. Thank you.
Good. Please listen to these explanations more, more frequently. Again, you will gain so much from the Dhamma, just because what your Kalyana Mitta might have asked, you might not have even thought about, or might be, yeah, you get it. Listening to it and the explanations provided, try to test them. Try to test them. Investigate for yourself. Yes. That's where you will turn the Dhamma very much into your life. It's very personal in that sense. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, then let us transfer some merits. Akasatha ca bhumata devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasana. Akasatha ca bhumata devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desana. Akasatha ca bhumata devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you take the Dhamma with you everywhere, even into your dream state, when you're sleeping, when you spend time with the Dhamma. It's wondrous. Its wonders will come through undeniably, proclaiming themselves unmistakably. And it's a very personal experience. It's a very direct understanding, which is one of the attributes of the Dhamma as well. So may your practice continue to grow, and May all the good work that you do, the merits of all that wonderful work, whether it's your sila, whether it's your generosity, open-handed generosity, whether you're able to relinquish and give up your old tendencies by asking yourself, what if, what if, what if? Wisely, with trust, however. And as your mind is being cultivated to develop more and more deeper and deeper states of purity, may there be wisdom, discernment taking place. May the blessings of the Triple Gem be with you and your loved ones. Sukhi Hot. Until next time.